There we go. Frankie, I got one for you right here. This is Frankie, this is Little, and this is their roadmap to success. Now, Frankie is a little bit of a pill. She dominates him, and he's a smaller one, and tries to steal his food. So the Guardians have been feeding him the kennel. The video above this one goes over structured feeding kind of exercise sit that we just went through. And I like the Guardians to do that consistently. And after a while, they won't have to shepherd the dogs as much. But for the first week or two, they're going to, especially she's going to really push. Either one of you play tennis by chance?
No.
So if you can go to a sporting goods store, if you're finding that they're going around you, she's defeating you by her athletic ability, go to a sporting goods store and spend $20 on getting a tennis racket. You can hold it, extends the length of your arm, and it helps you block the dogs. But the opening there is fairly narrow, so I think they'll be able to achieve it okay. Yes, I know, I'm going to tell them about all the stuff we went over. Crash is the word that I like to use for down. All right, so we'll talk about passive training because that's just what happened. So passive training is waiting for the dog to organically offer you the behavior you want. Little sat, I petted her, Little and said sit. He laid down, I petted him and said crash. Anything your dog is doing when you pet is what you're going to be specifically rewarding. Most of us train our dogs to misbehave. The dog barks and we correct it. It chews our remote control, we correct it. It pees in the house, we correct it. But it comes and sits in front of us, we ignore it. It lays down, comes to us, we ignore those things. So instead with passive training, we're going to start paying attention to those things. And when the dogs do offer them, we're going to pet them and say the command word after, and only the command word. Not good sit, just sit. Also, be careful about your inflection. They do hear inflection, so let's say sit, sit. So let's see, sit. Just like that. Use conversational tone. Also, if you notice, I'm petting under the chin. When a dog feels good about itself, his nose is parallel to the ground or tilted upward. We reach over on top of the dog. You see she's kind of cowering down a little bit. And so we don't want to pet or reach over the dog. We want to pet under the chin if all things are equal. But we can scratch her on her butt and anywhere else we want to as well. Just try to avoid patting on top of the head, especially for him because he's more bothered by it than you are. Now he's on top of me, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but one of the rules I talked about was not allowing the dogs on the furniture because, well, first of all, someone, yes, you, pees on the furniture. She has a little bit of a submissive thing going on, and that's a lack of control. We'll talk about ways that we can help with that. And this is a bit of a demand. She wants some attention. Crash. And so basically, if she tells me what to, if I give her access to the couch and she's peeing on it, that makes it frustrating for the Guardians. But also, it has there we go. I call this flop. Yes, you're not doing what I want you to do. I would like you to LAY, but not on top of me. All right. She's like, I can do anything you want. All right, so for dogs, the higher they sit, the more rank or status they have. So letting the dog sit in the furniture is a way of communicating that we are equals. If the dog sees you as an equal, then listening to you becomes optional. So we want the dogs for a minimum of 30 days. And all my clients say, you said 30 days. I said minimum, bare minimum. Probably going to be closer to 60 or 90 days. No furniture. And I recommend that the Guardians get X mats, so you probably need about 5 of them here to hold your place and help the dogs get out of the behavior pattern of jumping up on the couch. And at the same time, I show the Guardians how to train the dogs to go to the dog bed on command. The first one is throw the treat, second one is leave a treat, and third one is bring the dog over and sit or LAY and give it the treat. Now, when you do those things, make sure that you're saying the command word after the treat goes in the mouth, not just for that, but for anything. There we go, crash, sit. See, it's not that hard. I'd also like the Guardians to get a couple of dog beds so we can have them in different locations. The dog bed they have is fine, but make sure when you get it, it is light cream, white, or gray, and there's no pattern on it. Dogs' eyes are not very good for detail. If there's a pattern, they won't see it. Those light colors, when you put a treat there, they'll be able to see it right away. Let me see what else. Other rules, if anybody's eating here, they would say that between the wall to the couch and that leg of the couch to basically the stand the camera's on, is off limits while the humans are eating. And the humans are at the dinner table. The dog should not be within 7 feet of the humans who are eating, and we can use those escalating consequences to discrete. Now, it's hard because when we're actually eating, we're distracted, we're thinking about eating, and our timing is slow. Remember, if the dog takes 5 steps past the line and we correct, the dog thinks it's the 5th step that we're disagreeing with. We have to disagree the instant they cross the threshold. But when we're eating or cooking, we're distracted. Well, I have a solution for that. So what we want to do is we want to help them practice. So if you're going to cook, go in the kitchen. Once you pass the line, turn around and face them. And anytime they cross that line, you rush at them using that 3rd consequence. You can also use the hissing sound if you want. And then what we do is we microwave a piece of bacon or a piece of roast beef or some meat that's going to have a strong smell. We put it on the counter, and it's going to smell like we're cooking. Then we simulate cooking. We bang some pots and pans around, open the fridge, pull stuff in, put stuff out, and we pretend like they're stirring, and the dog's like, oh, She's like, it looks like we're distracted. I'm going to go in there and get me some. But we're not distracted. We're pretending. And so as soon as she crosses the line, we hiss and we rush at her. Eventually, when she sits or lays down beyond the line, I'm talking mostly about you, then we can actually put the bacon and stuff away and cook our actual meal. We help the dog warm up. And because we're not actually cooking, our timing's even much better. And so now the dog's like, man, they see everything out of the back of their head. Well, we don't. Well, we're just setting them up for success. And that's one of the things I do as a dog psychologist is I really try to break things down in individual steps. If the dog fails an activity, I remember what the activity is and I say, how can I make it an easiest version of that activity? And then I help the dog practice each step one at a time. So step one over and over and over in a practice scenario till the dog is automatically offering me the behavior that I want sitting down outside the line. The next step is I go to the second step and I practice that one over and over again till the dog is behaving the way I want for that step, and so on and so forth. When I get done with all the steps together, then I recreate the situation and now I do all the steps together, but again, in the easiest version possible. And then I gradually raise the criteria until eventually I get to the real world situation and the dog knows how to behave, we've taught it how to behave, and we've helped it practice how to behave. So I have a lot of people say, my dog is naughty, and I ask them, have you taught your dog how they should behave in that situation? People are like, no. Well, then that's the owner's fault, or what I refer to as guardians, not the dog's fault. Now, a lot of people watching this are like, oh, I was doing this wrong, I'm doing that wrong. Don't beat yourself up. If you didn't know about it, you did it, it's not your fault. If you watch this and now you know, and now you continue to do it, that is your fault. So dogs live in the now, so as long as we fix things, go quickly, they should, or are consistent, they should learn pretty quickly. Now, she's got really long dew claws here. And because she's a Chihuahua, all of hers are black and you can't see where they are. Dogs have a quick in their thumbnail or on all their fingernails. And if you go into it, it'll bleed and it'll hurt and it'll make the dog less likely to want to do it. So the solution that I do for this is I desensitize. I use a little classical conditioning to help the dog like each individual step, like I just started talking about. So the first step is I go to Dremel.com. That's where I like to get the Dremels. I find that, well, you can get it on Amazon, but get the one from Dremel.com. Or that they sell. And it's a lithium-ion battery, otherwise you go through the batteries too quickly. So what I do is I would have somebody on the far side of the room, the house, and I would have somebody over here giving the dog a piece of kibble, and she loves kibble, and then as soon as I put the treat in her mouth, then we turn the Dremel on. And it only runs for 1 or 2 seconds, and by the time she gets done chewing the kibble, don't chew the Dremel, then we turn the Dremel off. And so we do that. Well, actually, before we do that, the first thing we do is we give her a piece of kibble and hold up her digit like this, like you're gonna trim it, but don't do anything. Then give her another piece of kibble and then hold the next and go through for all of her individual paws. It's all right, hang in there, buddy. Now remember, if I pet for this, I'm going to be rewarding or amplifying this. I can lay my hand and be comforting with the dog without amplifying it. There's somebody walking outside, and that's why she's protesting, or he, excuse me. So going back to the Dremel. So the first thing I do is get them used to us handling their nails without anything else happening. Matter of fact, something good is happening. The next step is I would have somebody on this far side of the room with the Dremel. I would give a piece of kibble and then turn the Dremel on. We're not handling the feet at this point. We're just turning the Dremel and getting the dog used to the Dremel for a couple times first. And eventually then what we do is we give the piece of kibble and hold up and then turn the Dremel on while I'm holding this. But I'm not touching it. The Dremel's across the room. And we go through all the individual digits. And once the dog is comfortable with that, then we start walking the Dremel over. And this is multiple practice sessions in a row. And then maybe after a while, we can have the Dremel person sitting right here, turning it on and off. And the dog's like, whatever, man. I like that as the association of the sound of the Dremel and the kibble. Next step is I would take them, and before you do these more strenuous steps, do this after a long walk, when they're nice, when this is the energy that you have for the dogs. Don't do it when they're full of beans. So the next step is you want to try to trim a little bit of it off first because the Dremel just takes longer to go through. Then eventually what you do is you give a piece of kibble and you take the Dremel and you touch it to the nail off. And then you do it for another piece of kibble for all the individual nails. So we're getting used to us handling the sound of the Dremel, the touch on the nail, and nothing bad's happening. Now when you actually go to turning the Dremel on and touching it, I would go to probably the high value tricky trainer treats that I have. And then so you give the treat and maybe put, sometimes I have people wrap it in peanut butter because that way it's really sloppy in the mouth while you're trying to do the Dremel. And you're only touching it for 1 second. And then you go the next paw 1 second. And after a while, you can go 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Usually you don't want to Dremel for longer, about 3 or 4 seconds. Hers are really long, so you probably go a little bit longer at first, but it will heat up the nail, and that will cause a little bit of pain as well if you go for too long in a row. And this would be something you maybe do on a daily basis for a week or two. And after a while, she's like, yes, I'd like another petty, or I guess that'd be Manny. And I don't do that. But basically, the dog has a positive association with it. Okay, so jumping back to the session, I also went over petting with a purpose. Right now, the dogs jump up on the guardians and nudge the guardians and paw at the guardians for attention. So stop practicing the shake, as it confuses the dog. Instead, when she jumps up on my shin, I'm going to withdraw, and I can either freeze, that's very cute, or I can tell her to sit. I prefer to tell her to sit. If she sits within 3 seconds, then I pet her under her chin and say the word sit and only the word sit. If she doesn't, I just retract and I pull out my phone or watch TV. She missed out on that opportunity to get some attention. And then basically you keep on, and then what you're saying is when you tell me the human what to do, nothing happens. But if the human tells you what to do, you get rewarded. And you hear the command word. And after a while, the dog will start coming up and sitting in front of you to prepay for attention. When it does, make sure you pet her on the chin and say sit, and pet her as long as you want. Remember to use the watchword of paycheck if you suspect someone's petting without a purpose, and that person has to stop petting, tells the dog to sit, and then we reinforce and we tell the person, I did it right the first time, you just didn't see me pet the original time, or whatever it was. If you get in a habit of doing this, every time you pet your dog, it's like a micro dog training session. It boosts the dog's self-esteem because it's earning that affection rather than being given that affection. It increases its respect for the humans because it's following a human's order. And it's also practicing the behavior, which makes it easier to sit outside on walks and different things along those lines. Let's see, other rules that we went over, not being allowed to, at the kitchen table there, sitting at the door, we have stairs outside. I would suggest that as you're walking down the steps, that you stop short after 2 or 3 or 4 steps, and they don't ever win, and they can't race ahead of you. Remember, whoever's in front is the leader. Another rule is I make them sit before I let them out the door, and I would probably practice with this door to your little deck area. That way you can open the door as soon as they sit down, and they don't escape. They can escape, but they can't get anywhere. Now, I showed the guardians how you use a special twisted leash of a martingale collar. I was a little bit concerned about Little. He's a little bit hoarse. You can collapse a dog's trachea if you pull him too much, and he pulls a lot on the leash. So I showed the guardians how to use the martingale collar and add the special twisted leash, which puts the pressure on the chest and takes it off of the neck. We also went through the 5 rules for a structured walk. If you're watching this on doggoneproblems.com, the write-up that should be right below this one is for a dog named Odie. And he's a white, fluffy terrier with one eye. And so I went through how to do a structured walk and all the stuff I went through on the walk. So if you can't remember make sure what we went over today, watch that video. But also make sure your dog is nice and calm before the walk. And I think I talk about that in that video as well. But if you leash the dog up and go out and start on the walk when the dog's crazy, that's how it's going to behave on the walk. You have to achieve calmness before you leave. And a great way to do this is to practice leashing your dog up without actually going for a walk. We call this desensitizing. So, it used to be every time we pulled the leash, we went for a walk. Now, only 1 out of every 6 times that we pull up the leash, we walk. So I'm not as excited for it, and that helps the dog be more calm. Excited is not necessarily happy when it comes to dogs, although a lot of us confuse it being the case. Let me see, what else did we over? We went over, do we do a hand targeting exercise? We just did the focus exercise.
Yes, sir.
So for the focus exercise, remember, make sure you're raising at your nose, and then don't pause it at your nose. And one of the guardians needs to watch like a hawk. One of the guardians was a little distracted, and when Little looked, missed it. So remember, as soon as that dog looks, boom, boom. And that's about how fast it should be. And eventually it's 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, eventually get to the 15-second mark. I have the focus exercise on my website. I'm not going to go through it all here because it's going to be a really long video. Just go to doggoneproblems.com, click on dog training tips. There's a search box on the right, type in focus, and there'll be a bunch of videos where I've done it with other people as well. Let me see, what else do we want to go over? Anything else I'm forgetting? Exercising. So exercise is a big one. These are not high, super duper stamina dogs, but they do have some energy. And so one of the things I went over was using the doggy Stairmaster. So it's the only time I recommend a retractable leash. Get a retractable leash with an empty stomach. Go to the top of one of the sets of stairs in the complex here. Touch the dog's nose with the treat, and then throw it to the bottom. Make sure it hits the wall or the floor so it makes a sound. When the dog runs down and licks it up, just come up with a word called Cabo or whatever you want to say, something that needs to go south. Remember, try to come up with funny command words. Also, on the subject, come up with a list of the official command words. Now, if somebody's saying, come here, and then the word is here, you say vocabulary, and that person goes, here. And so only using one-word commands makes it easier for them. Remember, only not good, here, just here. So what we want to do is basically throw the treat, the dog runs down and gets it, we say Cabo, then we call it back up at the top of the stairs, and we call that one Aspen, or a word that needs to go up that's funny. And keep on doing that the first time until the dog won't do it. And then you know what the maximum number is. Count each down up as 1. And then if you, let's say for her, it's 20. Well, then we might want to exercise her a third to 3/4 of that 20 mark. And we're going to play around with how often we do it, how many we do, and how often we do this until we get to the point where her behavior overall was great. She's not barking at people. She's better on the walks, and she's not having the excited urination or submissive urination or whatever it is. The more that we exercise the dog and put him in position to succeed, it's going to make it easier to fix your problems, and it's going to amplify the problems that you have. Another one that we can do is scent games. Google scent games, SCENT. And what it is, you hide the dogs in another room and you hide 5 treats just around a corner. Dog comes around the corner and finds you say hunt or feed, whatever the word is that means to do it. Now they're using their nose, which controls 60% of their brain, and it's very draining for them. Playing fetch is a good one as well, but I don't think they're much on the fetch. But exercising your dog before you take it on a walk can be really beneficial. Let me see, what else? Is this a little growth right here? It is growth? Okay, so you might want to check that. A lot of times there's just little fatty tumors or whatever, but actually I've learned a little secret with this. I have a bunch of on my older Dalmatian, and the vet's like, yeah, keep an eye on it. If it gets bigger, let me know. I'm like, well, how do I know if it gets bigger? What I did is I took a piece of wax paper, like you bake cookies on, and I took a Sharpie and I drew around the deal. And I wrote a line, and then I wrote the date. And then once a month I would put that back on and see, did it eclipse that circle? And if it did, kind of when, I draw another circle around it. And so if it's growing rapidly, that's one of the things you want to have your dog have it fixed. I just worked with a dog about a week ago. It had a tumor that was like this big. It was a lab. But I would have rather had that taken care of than have the dog carry that around. A lot of times there's fatty tumors, not a big deal, but just something to keep in mind. Also, we are in a apartment complex. A lot of people come by. So what I recommend the guardians do a little bit of maintenance. So we have kind of a door with panes in it. We have windows. I would use the 3 panes as your guide. Get a piece of white standard paper, just clear paper or white paper with nothing printed on it, and tape it on the outside of the door so they can't scratch it off. And do it the bottom 6, and then on the window it's over here, I would maintain it so it's the same level. This way, when people walk by, the dogs won't be able to see them, and it'll get them out of habit of barking at people. Both these dogs are barkers, and I think a lot of this is stress because they didn't see their humans acting like leaders. They think they're in charge, but the humans don't listen to them, and it becomes just a vicious cycle. So the petting with the purpose, the passive training, enforcing rules, all those things are going to help the dog start seeing the humans as leaders. But if we take away the visual of people coming by, the violators in their mind, that makes them feel comfortable. Now, we do have a set of dogs down the street, and we went on a walk, and the guardians were like, oh, they're going to bark like crazy. But because the dogs were nice and controlled, those 3 dogs didn't bark at all. Now, if they do go back to barking, make sure that you're checking that your dogs are not the cause of it, because from what I saw today, maybe that is the catalyst. But if maybe those dogs are just having an off day, or they were just overly tired, they were at dog daycare or whatever, I fix that a lot. What I do is I usually make sure you ask the guardians or the owners of those dogs first before you do it, because some dogs will fight each other for the treat. But I've got a lot of people, the dogs bark when people come by the fence. So a lot of times what I recommend people do is get a piece of string cheese, slice it so it's like medallions or little pepperonis, and then as you're walking by, ask the guardians, is it okay? And if they're cool with it, then as you walk by, you're throwing these little medallions of cheese over the fence. So what the dogs are doing is they're barking and saying, hey, I don't like you being here, you're a violator, you're invading our space. Oh, I had it wrong. You're cheese delivery people. Please come back more and more often. And so if you do that enough, after a while, the dogs will come and sit and kind of look, where's the cheese coming from? And so, but again, hopefully what we achieve today is the beginning of a normal trend. And if the dogs are nice and calm and relaxed, it's just going to help them live longer. It's going to make it less stressful for the humans and less reactive to the people in the neighborhood. Anything else we want to go over?
I think that's it, yeah.
Okay. Now, if you have any questions or things are not working, you will get to a day where they're like, F this, I'm going back to the way it was. I get panicked calls. Just keep doing what you're doing. They just remembered how they used to do it the other way. After a while, they'll just get a new behavior pattern. Remember, it takes at least 30 days to form that behavior pattern. So really be strict about all this stuff that we're going over for the next month and a half. And eventually the dogs will kind of get in a behavior pattern for that. And then you don't have to enforce it quite so much. But do it. There's a movie, As Good as It Gets, where Helen Hunt's character says, I think our problem is we've been doing this half-assed. We need to start doing this whole-assed. And I'm sorry to be a curse, but a lot of people do the same thing with their dogs. They do it a half-hearted job for a while, then they have to spend the rest of their dog's life doing the other half. Make a commitment for the next 45 days to be just militant and strict about all of this stuff. And then you can start relaxing, and the dogs are kind of in that new behavior pattern. Then they're doing the work for us. We're not doing it for them. All right. Well, like I said, message me if you have any questions. If I don't hear from you, I assume that everything's going great. So if there are questions or problems, make sure you let me know. This crazy dog is Frankie, and this crazy dog is Chicken Little, which is the most unforgettable name of all time. Yes. And we're doing the focus exercise. Just get a little rubber band and band that up there and give it a little faux hawk, or whatever you want to call it, and make it easy for the dog to see it. But after a while, the dog will just start looking right away. All right, Chicken Little, Frankie, David, this is the roadmap to success. Remember, everything you do trains your dog, only sometimes you mean it.